The gun wasn't empty. I saw them change the gun. These words came from the mouth of a 6-year-old child standing in the toy section of a Target store in Pasadena, California. His mother had given him a plastic toy gun. It was black, harmless, the kind every child plays with. But the moment his fingers touched it, he dropped it as if it were burning. His face turned pale, his pupils dilated, and then he started screaming. They changed it, and no one intervened. His 32-year-old mother, Jessica Harmon, who had no connection to the film industry, didn't understand what her son was talking about. She knelt down and tried to calm him, but her eyes were fixed on the plastic gun lying on the floor. Other customers stopped, and the child, trembling, whispered something that would haunt his mother for the rest of her life. My name was Brandon Lee, and they left me to die. The 31st of March, 1993, on a film set in North Carolina, a toy gun contained a real bullet. During the filming of The Crow, one of Hollywood's most infamous tragedies, the death of Bruce Lee's son occurred. The case was closed as an accident and negligence, until a child born in 2019 began to recount the moments before the trigger was pulled. You are about to witness an extremely disturbing case that even skeptics cannot explain. Jessica Harmon always saw herself as a rational person. She worked with numbers, spreadsheets, and provable facts. Her son Danny was born in August 2019 in a small suburban home in Pasadena. He was a normal child. He had a vivid imagination. But he was normal. The Harmon family had no connection to Hollywood. They didn't watch martial arts films. They didn't discuss conspiracy theories. Their home was filled with picture books, toy trucks, and the comfortable chaos that comes with raising a small child. Danny was only 6 years old. They had gone to Target for grocery shopping. Danny was trailing behind, looking at the toys. At that moment, Jessica picked up a black plastic gun from the discount section. It was the kind of toy gun sold for Halloween costumes. It was cheap and harmless. She held it up and smiled. "Would you like this to play with?" That is when Danny's expression changed. His eyes widened. His mouth opened. Then he recoiled. He bumped into the shelf with the action figures. The plastic gun fell to the floor. Jessica, thinking he had hurt himself, ran towards him. But when she touched his shoulder, he pulled away from her as if she were a stranger. "Danny, baby, what is going on? Are you okay?" Danny was staring at the gun on the floor. He was breathing fast. His little hands were shaking. It wasn't supposed to be a real bullet. "They said it was a fake bullet, but I felt it go into my body." Jessica bent down, trying to make eye contact. But Danny's gaze was still fixed on the plastic toy. "Danny, it is just a toy. It is not real." The injured man changed it when no one was looking. He said something to Michael, but I couldn't hear. Then we filmed that scene. Danny started crying as he told her this. "And then I couldn't breathe," he continued. An elderly woman in the store asked if everything was okay. Jessica picked Danny up and carried him out of the store. She didn't do her grocery shopping. She just put her son in the car and drove home in silence. That night, after Tom came home from work, they sat Danny down at the kitchen table. He seemed calmer now. When Tom gently asked him what had happened at the store, Danny's answer came immediately. "Dad, I died on the 31st of March, 1993. Tom and Jessica looked at each other. They were both shocked. Danny had never talked like this before. "Danny, you were born in 2019. You are only 6 years old." Danny shook his head. "I am talking about my previous life, Dad. I was someone else before." "Before?" Jessica asked. Danny looked at her. "My name was Brandon Lee, and I was filming a movie called The Crow." Jessica had heard of Brandon Lee. She knew he had died young, but she didn't know the details. She didn't know the date. Tom took out his phone. He searched on Google. Brandon Lee had been accidentally shot on a movie set. He showed the screen to Jessica. Jessica's eyes widened. "Danny, where did you hear about this?" "I didn't hear it. I remember it." Then Danny began to describe the film set. He talked about the warehouse location in Wilmington. He described the scene they were shooting, where the character Eric Draven enters an apartment and is shot. He mentioned the hydraulic detonator placed under his costume, used to simulate the bullet's impact. He explained that the gun had to be loaded with a blank. But something went wrong. A piece of bullet from a previous incident was lodged in the barrel. When Michael fired the blank, the piece flew out. It made a sound just like a real gun. Tom's face turned pale. Jessica's hands were shaking, because Danny was right. That was exactly how Brandon Lee had died. A bullet fragment stuck in the barrel had caused his death. A blank cartridge had been fired. The fragment had shot forward with enough force to pierce his stomach. He died in the hospital 12 hours later, but this was information a 4-year-old child shouldn't know. It was information most adults didn't even know. "Who told you that?" Jessica asked. Danny looked at her as if the answer were obvious. "No one told me, Mom. I was there." Tom stood up. He started walking toward the kitchen. Tom was a history teacher, a man who believed in evidence, documents, facts, but his son had just recounted forensic details about a death resulting from an accident that had happened 30 years ago. "Danny, do you remember anything else?" Danny shook his head. "I remember the man who changed the gun. He wasn't part of our team. He had a scar on his face, a line running down his left cheek. He was wearing a gray coat. He was only there for 2 days, and after I died, no one could find him." Jessica held Tom's arm. "We need to look into this." But Tom had already started looking. He combed through news articles, police reports, and research papers. The official conclusion was clear. Death by accident, no foul play, a tragic series of errors. However, Tom saw something interesting in a 1994 forum post by a team member. There was a day laborer who disappeared after the incident, and we couldn't figure out where he was. He was a man with a scar. He disappeared after the incident. Tom looked at Danny, who was drawing at the table and humming softly to himself. "That is impossible," Tom whispered. But the evidence was right before his eyes. His sons remembered the moment of death, and the details were incredibly accurate. Tom Harmon couldn't sleep that night. In his home study, he delved into the depths of research on Brandon Lee's death. He read every article, interview, and conspiracy theory. And as he read, his son's words echoed in his mind. The man with the scar changed him. By morning, Tom had made a decision. If Danny's memories were real, then they needed to talk to someone who was an expert on these matters. Someone who could explain what had happened to their son. They found Dr. Evelyn Marsh. Dr. Marsh was a professor of psychiatry at UCLA specializing in childhood trauma and dissociative disorders. She had published articles on false memory syndrome, the power of suggestion, and how children could absorb information from their surroundings and turn it into detailed stories. She was a skeptical scientist, exactly the kind of person Tom needed. They scheduled an appointment for the following week. The next week, they went to Dr. Marsh's office in Westwood. When they entered, she smiled at Danny. "You must be Danny. I am Dr. Marsh. Your family told me you have some very interesting memories." Danny nodded, but didn't speak. Dr. Marsh pointed to a small table with crayons and paper on it. "While I talk to your mom and dad, would you draw a picture for me?" For the next 20 minutes, Dr. Marsh asked Tom and Jessica questions about Danny's development, his exposure to the media, and his social interactions. He was very thorough. He had a clinical approach. Even when we told him about the Target incident and the details Danny had given, his expression didn't change. Children are incredibly perceptive. They pick up information from conversations, from the television playing in the background, even from things we aren't aware they hear. It is possible Danny heard something. His mind may have turned it into a personal narrative, but he said the 31st of March, 1993, before we looked it up. Dr. Marsh shook his head. Important dates can become embedded in cultural memory. Brandon Lee's death is often discussed on its anniversary. It is possible Danny heard that date by chance. Jessica leaned forward. "What about the man with the scar?" Dr. Marsh paused. "If someone researched it enough, those details could be found online. Did Danny have unsupervised access to the internet?" "He is only 6. He plays with toy cars." Dr. Marsh turned to Danny, who was still drawing. "Danny, can I see what you are working on?" Danny slid the paper across the table. It was the same picture he had drawn before, the man in the coat, but this time there was something new. In the corner of the page, Danny had drawn a series of numbers. Dr. Marsh examined the drawing. "What does the number 41 mean, Danny?" "It is the apartment number in the movie. I was shot in apartment 41, said Danny. Dr. Marsh's expression didn't change, but Tom saw him grip his pen tighter. He turned to his computer typed something, and waited. The search results loaded. His eyes scanned the screen, and for the first time since they'd entered his office, Tom saw a flicker of doubt in his professional demeanor. The room suddenly fell silent. That is a very specific detail. So you believe him? Asked Jessica. Dr. Marsh took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. I believe Danny believes what he is saying. I can't say whether it is a real memory or a complex fabrication, but I must admit, it is beyond typical childhood fantasies. Tom leaned forward. What should we do? Dr. Marsh looked at Danny, his expression unreadable. If you want certainty, you need to take him to the source. Take him to Wilmington, North Carolina, the actual place where Brandon Lee died. If Danny's memories are fabricated, being in the real place will shatter the illusion. Children cannot sustain false narratives when confronted with conflicting physical evidence. But if his memories are something else, then he will understand. Jessica gasped. You want us to take our 6-year-old child to the place where someone died? I want you to know the truth, said Dr. Marsh, because right now you are living in uncertainty. And that is even worse. 3 weeks later, the Harmon family was parked in the lot of the old Carolco Studios in Wilmington, North Carolina. The building had been sold several times since 1993. It was now being used as a warehouse. The sound stages where The Crow was filmed were still there, but they were empty. They had been completely cleared out. People said the production was cursed. After what happened, no one wanted to film there. Tom had contacted the property manager and explained their situation. He said they were investigating the Brandon Lee case. The manager, a man named Carl in his 60s, agreed to let them in. The flight from California had been long. Danny, standing in the North Carolina summer heat, looked at the building. This is it, he said softly. Carl opened the heavy metal door. He led them inside. The air was dusty and stifling. The studio was enormous, cave-like. It was empty except for a few forgotten pieces of equipment covered with tarps. Carl pointed to the far end of the stage and said, The set for The Crow was built over there, but it has been dismantled for decades. Danny moved slowly forward. Tom and Jessica followed him, along with Dr. Marsh, who insisted on coming along to observe them. Danny stopped in the middle of the space. He slowly turned in a circle. His eyes scanned the walls, the ceiling, the floor. The stairs were here. They led up to the circle set, and there was a rain machine right up there. They used it for the stage. Carl's face turned pale. What do you mean? There were 3 cameras, one here, one on a wheeled platform, and one up there for wide shots. Dr. Marsh was taking notes. His hand was shaking. Danny stood in front of the section of wall where the paint had peeled. He pressed his palm against it. After the blank was fired, I fell right here. I fell backwards, and Michael dropped the gun. He was crying. He kept apologizing. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. Tom's jaw was clenched. Carl stepped forward. Son, I worked on that movie. I was part of the lighting crew, and you are right. But how do you know? Danny turned to him. His eyes were teary. Because I was there, and I need to find the man who switched the gun, because back then, no one believed me, but maybe now they will. Dr. Marsh closed his notebook. He looked at Tom and Jessica. I think we need to find out if this man really existed. The investigation began with a phone call. Tom spent hours trying to find former crew members who had worked on the set of The Crow. Most had moved on, some had passed away, others refused to talk. It was a painful affair. It was filled with grief and guilt. However, one name kept cropping up in the film's credits, in forums, and in the footnotes of articles written about that day. Script supervisor Raymond Torres still lives in Wilmington. Tom found his number in the film industry database. Yes? Mr. Torres, my name is Tom Harmon. I am researching the 1993 Brandon Lee incident and was hoping you could help me. I don't talk about that. Please, I just want to talk about my son for 5 minutes. There was a long silence. What about your son? Tom explained everything. He expected Torres to hang up. Instead, the man took a long, slow breath. Bring him to my house tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Don't bring a camera. Raymond Torres lived in a small, single-story house in the suburbs of Wilmington. The yard was unkempt. The paint was peeling. When Tom, Jessica, Danny, and Dr. Marsh arrived, Torres was waiting on the porch with a cigarette in his hand. He was in his 70s. His hair was graying, his face lined with years of sun and cigarette butts. But his eyes were sharp and alert. He watched Danny get out of the car. "Is that him?" Torres asked. "Yes, that is him," said Tom. Torres put out his cigarette. "Come inside." The inside of the house was cluttered but clean. Old movie scripts covered the walls, photos from various productions hung in frames, and in the corner of the living room stood a large filing cabinet. Torres motioned for them to sit down. He remained standing. He was studying Danny. "Are you saying you remember Brandon Lee?" Danny nodded. "Tell me something only someone who worked on that set would know, something that wasn't in the news." Danny thought for a moment. Then he said, "You had a red notebook. You always carried it with you, and right before the scene, you spilled coffee on it." Brandon laughed. "He said it was good luck, but you didn't find it funny." Torres's face turned pale. He turned away, walked to the window, and looked out at the street. "No one knows this. It is not in any report, any article. I never told anyone." Dr. Marsh watched Torres closely. Torres turned back to them. 53 people were on set the day Brandon died. I knew 49 of them personally. The other 4 were day laborers. 3 had finished their shifts. Their papers were in order. But the 4th was a man named John Kelton, or at least that was the name he gave. He had been hired as a general production assistant. He arrived on the 30th of March. He worked for 2 days, and after filming, he disappeared. "What did he look like?" asked Tom. Torres walked over to the filing cabinet. He opened a drawer. He pulled out a thick folder. He placed the folder on the table. Inside were photocopies of production documents, call sheets, crew lists, and photos. "I kept copies of everything from that shoot. I couldn't forget. I couldn't stop thinking about what went wrong." He shuffled through the pages until he found what he was looking for. He found a photocopy of a crew ID card. The image was black and white, but the face was clear. A man in his 40s, dark hair, and a scar running down his left cheek. Danny leaned forward. He touched the photo with his little finger. "That is him, the man who switched the gun." The room suddenly fell silent. Dr. Marsh took the photo in his hand. "Mr. Torres, was this man ever questioned by the police?" "They wanted to question him, but the address he gave on his application was fake. The phone number didn't work. The social security number belonged to a dead man. There was no John Kelton. The police investigated for 2 months. They found nothing. In the end, they concluded it was a tragic accident, bad luck, a series of mistakes. But some of us always wondered." Jessica's voice trembled. "What did you wonder?" Torres sat down heavily in his chair. Brandon Lee was Bruce Lee's son. His father died under mysterious circumstances. Some believed it was a curse. Others believed it was people who didn't want the Lee family to succeed. I know it sounds like conspiracy theory nonsense, but when a man with a fake ID shows up on set 2 days before a fatal accident and then disappears without a trace, you start to wonder. Tom looked at Danny. "Is there anything else you remember about this man? Can you tell us anything that might help us identify him?" Danny closed his eyes. He had a tattoo on his wrist, and he spoke with an accent. I couldn't tell where it was from, and he said something to Michael before the scene. "For this family," he said. I didn't understand what he meant. Torres suddenly stood up. He walked back to the filing cabinet. This time, he pulled a worn cardboard box from the bottom drawer. Inside were personal items from the set. "After the shooting, I gathered everything I could before the police sealed off the scene. I knew something was wrong. I knew the official statement wasn't consistent. Inside the box was a piece of paper that had yellowed with age. I found this near the props table, the day after Brandon died. It was wedged under a toolbox. I didn't show it to the police because I didn't know what it meant. I still don't." He handed the bag to Tom. Inside was a handwritten note. The ink had faded, but the words were still legible. "The 31st of March, apartment 41. Empty shell in chamber 4. A piece in the barrel, fate completes itself." Dr. Marsh took the bag. "This is premeditated murder. This is evidence of murder." Torres slowly shook his head. "I've been carrying this for 30 years. I never knew what to do with it. I wasn't sure anyone would believe me. Now I guess someone sent you back to finish what Brandon couldn't do, to tell the truth." Danny's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want to die. I had so much more to do, but he took that away from me. Tom stood up, holding the evidence bag. We need to take this to the authorities. We need to reopen the case. Torres shook his head. 30 years have passed. The statute of limitations has expired on most of the crimes. And without a real name, with no way to track this man, the police won't do anything. Then what do we do? Jessica asked. Torres looked at Danny, still crying in his mother's arms. You allowed the child to find peace. You made sure he knew someone believed him. Someone knew the truth. Because that is all Brandon Lee ever wanted. He wanted to know it wasn't just an accident, that someone deliberately ended his life. Danny lifted his head. His face was flushed. His eyes swollen. Thank you for keeping the note. Thank you for not forgetting. Torres knelt before Danny. For the first time since they'd arrived, his expression softened. I never forgot you, son. They set off to return to California. Danny looked peaceful for the first time in months. The nightmares were over. The drawings were over. It was as if finding Raymond Torres, as if seeing the note had lifted a heavy weight from his small shoulders. Tom and Jessica didn't know what to do with the evidence. They had made copies of everything. Dr. Marsh had written an official report detailing Danny's memories and the relevant evidence. They had contacted a lawyer. The lawyer explained that, as Torres had warned, the case was legally complicated. 30 years had passed. The prime suspect had a false identity. There was no body to exhume, no new forensic evidence to analyze. But Tom uploaded everything to a private server. He created a digital archive, and he reached out to investigative journalists, podcasters covering crime stories, anyone who might be willing to tell the story. Because even if the legal system couldn't deliver justice, the truth needed to be known. Danny is 7 years old now, like childhood memories. His memories have faded. He no longer draws the roof. He doesn't talk about the injured man. But sometimes, while watching movies with his family, he pauses and says something very knowledgeable, very specific, as if he had seen behind the scenes of how movies are made, as if he had been there before. Tom and Jessica have given up trying to explain it. Dr. Marsh wrote 2 academic articles published in peer-reviewed journals about Danny's case. The psychology community remains divided. Skeptics point to the possibility of cryptomnesia, that is, secret memories acquired from unknown sources. Believers point to the evidence, photographs, notes, details that cannot be fabricated. Raymond Torres passed away in his sleep last year. In his will, he left Danny the original handwritten note, framed and sealed, along with a single instruction: keep telling the truth. The note now hangs in Danny's bedroom, next to a spider, man poster, and a shelf full of toy cars. He doesn't talk about it much, but sometimes, late at night, Jessica finds him standing in front of the note, his small hand pressed against the glass. Do you remember him? She asked once. Do you remember when you were Brandon? Danny thought for a long time. Then he smiled. It was a sad, distant smile, not one you'd expect to see on a child's face. I remember enough, he said. The scarred man was never found. John Kelton, if that was his real name, vanished into the shadows of history. Some researchers believe he is dead. Others believe he lives under a new identity, in a new country, far from the consequences of his actions. The case remains open in the Wilmington Police Department archives, but there is no active investigation. But the story lives on, in forums, in documentaries, in late-night conversations among people wondering if the line between life and death is thinner than we think, and in the memory of a little boy who carried the weight of a stolen life and, in the end, found someone who believed him. Brandon Lee was 28 when he died. He was on the cusp of stardom. His whole life lay ahead of him, and someone took him away. But perhaps he returned in a way we don't fully understand. Not to seek revenge, not to demand justice. Just to say, I was here, I mattered, and someone needs to know what really happened. Do you believe Danny truly carries Brandon Lee's memories? If you think this is nothing more than an incredible coincidence, a child's imagination, or acquired and reconstructed information, discuss it with me in the comments. But before you decide, ask yourself this: how could a 4-year-old child know the apartment number from a movie he never saw? How could he recognize a crew member who has been erased from history? How could they describe the moment of death with details never disclosed to the public? Some mysteries have answers, some don't. But the evidence is there. The photograph, the note, the testimony of a man who was there on the 31st of March, 1993, and kept the truth hidden for 30 years. The question isn't whether you believe in reincarnation. The question is whether you believe a child deserves to be heard when they say, "I remember dying and I know who killed me." Join us as we uncover the next impossible story, because the world is full of mysteries, and some of those mysteries are hidden in the hearts of children who remember lives they never lived.